disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Ken Kuminski, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from current issues of the Niagara Gazette on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. We'll start out with Council to reconsider NFR payment. Lawmakers could approve using tribal revenue to pay lawsuit settlement by Rick Pfeiffer. Members of the Niagara Falls City Council will make another attempt to approve the payment of $4 million to a South End landowner as part of a court-approved settlement of multiple lawsuits at their regularly scheduled meeting. The effort comes just days after an attorney for the landowner, Niagara Falls Development, demanded that the Falls immediately make the settlement payment or face a new legal action. The resolution, sponsored by Council Member James Perry, directs the City Controller to make the payment to NFR by drawing funds from the city's tribal revenue account. Mayor Robert Rostano had previously submitted resolutions asking that the money to pay the settlement be taken from the city's general fund balance. A majority of council members have said they would prefer to use tribal revenue funds which flow to the city from New York State under the terms of a gaming compact with the Seneca Nation of Indians. Those members also said that Rostano had indicated previously that funding to acquire the land for the proposed Centennial Park project should come from tribal revenue. The most recent attempt to approve the settlement payment came at a council special meeting on July 17th. That effort failed in a tie vote with council members David Zajac and Perry in favor of the resolution and members Vincent Cawley and Bridget Miles opposed. Council Chair Brian Archie was excused from that meeting. In a letter to the Gazette, Cawley, who voted to approve the settlement agreement, wrote that he did so only because I wanted to protect the undesirable expenditure of additional funds to the eminent domain case that spawned the multiple lawsuits tied to the agreement. Cawley, who was not a member of the council when the eminent domain proceedings involving the proposed Centennial Park project began, wrote that he would not have voted to do so. If I had been on the council, I do not support this action. The council member wrote that using money from the city's general fund balance to pay the settlement was completely unacceptable to him, and that, until recently, it was understood that the funding source would be casino funds, thereby not impacting the taxpayer. It is my deep concern that this project is not in alignment with the priorities of our community at this juncture, Cawley wrote. I don't want to obligate the taxpayer for any cost associated with or accruing any debt regarding the Centennial Park Event Center project. Cawley, in his letter, did acknowledge that NFR is entitled to payment and the city is obligated to comply. Miles said her opposition to making the settlement payment also goes back to the funding source. Acting City Controller Maria Brown, in a memo previously sent to council members, wrote that the general fund balance was a better source for covering the settlement costs. From a financial management standpoint, using the city's fund balance for this land acquisition is the more fiscally responsible option than using tribal revenue funds, one controller wrote. But Miles said the memo wasn't signed by the controller and questioned its contents. The controller should come to the council and explain her opinion, Miles said. From the get-go, this was not a good process, and we're stuck paying this. In his letter to the city, NFR lawyer John Horn demands the city promptly pay the $4 million due to NFR as part of a stipulated settlement order signed June 12th by State Supreme Court Justice Deborah Chimes. The settlement, previously approved by a closely divided city council vote on June 3rd, requires the city to pay NFR $4 million to cover costs associated with the company's decision to donate 10 acres to its South End property to the city so it can be used for the development of the proposed $210 million Centennial Park project. The settlement ends 4 separate lawsuits between the Falls and NFR over the city's bid to acquire property for Centennial Park using its power of eminent domain. It also clears the way for NFR to pursue its plan to develop a 9-structure, $1.5 billion data center campus in the same area of the city. Horn warned that if the settlement payment was not made by the close of business on Wednesday, July 22nd, he had been directed by my client to request judicial intervention to compel the city to pay the settlement sum. A frustrated Restano said Wednesday evening, "I sent the letter to all of them. This is a real problem." Next, market-side expansion, a dream come true for owner. Tony Paletti honors late grandmother during Friday ribbon cutting. There is an ornate rose on the glass portion of the entrance door to the new dining area inside the market-side restaurant in the Niagara Falls City Market. The rose was designed in honor of Grandma Rosie, the member of the Paletti family who, back in the 1930s, had the idea to chase a dream of owning and operating a family-owned restaurant in the city. She worked at Kresge's department store at the lunch counter, and she said, "We can do that too." And that's how it all started, said Rosie's grandson and market-side owner, Tony Paletti. The rose, designed by Paletti's wife's aunt, Debbie DiCamillo, served as a centerpiece in a ribbon cutting and celebration held on Friday to mark the opening of the restaurant's expansion. A newly completed dining area next to the existing restaurant space will offer room for 60 more guests, giving the market side more flexibility and the ability to host large family parties and other gatherings. The finished expansion, with the touch of the Grandma Rosie's rose, made the celebration all the more special for Paletti's dad, co-owner Mike Paletti. He not only honored me, but he honored my mother, who started the whole thing, he said. The market side expansion has been a project years in the making. The space hasn't been occupied since 1996, when Goodfellas Pizzeria closed and moved to a space on the opposite side of the city market. Tony Paletti acquired the property in 2011. The restaurant's owners started building out the new 800 square foot dining area 3 years later. The new dining space is part of a larger $200,000 expansion project that includes the market-side theater, an outdoor patio and dining space that features a projection screen capable of showing sporting events, movies, and more. The theater area also includes a Renaissance-themed mural designed and painted by local artist and filmmaker Ken Cosentino. The project received grant assistance through the city's Small Business Improvement Program. It really is a dream come true. It came out exactly the way I imagined it, Tony Paletti said. Tony Paletti followed in his dad's footsteps in owning and operating the family restaurant, representing the fourth generation to do so. When it opened in 1939, the market-side Grandma Rosie cooked the food the restaurant served in a neighboring house and brought it to the dining area. Subsequent generations expanded the restaurant to include more dining space and a proper kitchen. Tony Paletti worked at the restaurant for 22 years before taking over as owner in 2023. He was joined in cutting the ribbon on the new expansion by his father, Mike, his wife, Kylie, and his 4 children, Tony, Patsy, Vito, and Franny, and dozens of longtime customers and supporters. I want to thank my family, my customers, and my workers for making my dreams come true, Poletti said. Now switching to Canada, Canada celebrates new bridge during tariff troubles. Windsor, Ontario. Canada on Friday celebrated the completion of a new bridge to the U.S. over the Detroit River, cutting a ceremonial ribbon on a multi-billion-dollar, multi-year project that will serve as a critical path for trade, jobs, and tourism between the countries. As the 6-lane Gordie Howe International Bridge dominated the skyline behind them, officials lined up in Windsor, Ontario, to hail what one described as one of the most significant infrastructure achievements in Canada's history. The bridge opens to traffic on Monday. Some days are remembered because they mark the end of a journey. Others are remembered because they mark the beginning of something entirely new. Today is both, said Chuck Endary, interim CEO of the Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority, which will operate the bridge. Missing from the event, U.S. and Michigan representatives. Canada scratched a joint gathering after President Donald Trump this week suddenly announced 50% tariffs on Canadian goods entering the U.S. A soloist sang the national anthem, O Canada, but the U.S. anthem was not performed. Our relationship has been challenged over the last few years, and President Trump is threatening tariffs just this month. But Team Canada has never been more united, Ontario Premier Doug Ford told the crowd, which applauded at times during his defense of the country. Bridges are critical to moving goods between countries. More than 70% of Canada's exports go to the U.S., making America its largest trade partner, and Detroit is the #1 port for truck traffic on the U.S.-Canada border, according to the U.S. Department of Transportation. The Howe Bridge will instantly create competition. For nearly a century, the privately owned Ambassador Bridge has been the only route for large commercial trucks moving between the U.S. and Canada at Detroit. Businesses say the new span will be faster and less expensive. The bridge is named for Howe, a Canadian icon, Mr. Hockey, who played on the other side of the Detroit River for the NHL's Detroit Red Wings. He died in 2016. Ford and Mark Wiseman, the Canadian ambassador to the U.S., wore hockey sweaters with Howe's number 9. Trump didn't attend, but his role was felt. Windsor Mayor Drew Dilkens repeatedly praised Howe and appeared to take a subtle dig at Trump. He said he recently texted Dr. Murray Howe to ask who might be his father's target these days if he had to slam someone into the hockey boards. He's a gentleman, he didn't answer, Dilkens said, but I think we all know who that person might be if Gordie was going to check one person into the board. Surrounded by family, Murray Howe thanked residents of both countries and specifically named Canadian officials and the U.S. president. He recalled how his father grew up in Saskatchewan before moving to Ontario at age 16 for a tryout with the Red Wings. This bridge will serve as an unmistakable symbol of the priceless bond and true friendship between the people of Canada and the people of the United States, Murray Howe said, expressing the same long-term view as other speakers. Canada paid for the bridge, but will share revenue. Construction, which began in 2018, took years, partly because of a global slowdown caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Canada paid to build the bridge at an estimated cost of $6.4 billion. A recent agreement says Canada will share some toll revenue with the United States government for 15 years. Trump praised his administration for that deal in a social media post while the Ontario event was in progress. We changed the terms, he said. Michigan will also get a share, but not until Canada's costs are recovered, likely decades from now. The bridge is 1.5 miles long and rises 151 feet above the Detroit River at its highest point. Pedestrians and bicyclists carrying proper identification will be able to cross it for free in a few weeks. And here's a little story about Bessie Louise White, who turned 104 on July 15th. Bessie Louise White turned 104 on July 15th, celebrating her birthday with a large gathering at her South Avenue home. Having lived in Niagara Falls since 1953, when her family moved to the area from Port St. Joe, Florida, White worked as a YMCA baker at the original Mount St. Mary's Hospital at 6th Street and Ferry Avenue, as well as at Carborundum and Niagara Falls Memorial Medical Center. White said this week that she even spent time working as a model for a clothing store that used to be located at Main and 3rd Streets. While White attributes her long life to praying 4 times a day and thanking God every morning. When I wake up in the morning, I tell God, "Good morning, how are you?" White said. "The roads you want me to travel today to please you. I ask you to help me if I can't do it by myself." And as a reminder, you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Gazette on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The time is now 16 minutes past the hour. And here's an article from the historical perspective. Elisha B. Swift, Cambria pioneer and Lockport businessman. A few weeks ago, one of our Facebook followers asked if this column had ever done anything on Elisha B. Swift, whose house still stands on Plank Road in Cambria. Since neither he, his family, nor his home had been covered before, this would be an interesting new topic. Elisha Barlow Swift may not be a well-known name in Niagara County today, but in the late 19th century, he was one of the county's most prominent men and was involved in several different enterprises in the area. He was born on February 4th, 1823, in Henrietta in Monroe County to Henry and Dorcas Sherwood Swift. The couple moved to Niagara County with their 6 children in 1844 and settled on a farm in Cambria on the west side of Plank Road between Lower Mountain and Van Dusen Roads. In 1850, Swift married Adeline Follett Brown, originally from Rhode Island, and moved to a farm on Bear Ridge Road just north of Pritchard's Bridge in the town of Pendleton. The 1852 Niagara County map shows Swift owned property on both sides of the road, and today there are 2 old houses still standing in that vicinity. But it is not known if one was the home the Swifts may have occupied. In 1855, the Swifts relocated to the village of Lockport, where Elisha Swift engaged in the grocery business with his brother Moses G. at 22 Main Street, approximately where Papa Leo's parking lot is now. He later went into partnership with David Crosby at the same location in about 1868. During most of this time, the Swifts lived on Spalding Street near the corner of Locust Street. After nearly 20 years as a grocer, Swift made the decision to take up farming again and bought property on Plank Road in the town of Cambria, where his widowed mother and his brother Orrin also had their homes. He built a house which is depicted in the 1878 history of Niagara County. Although Elisha Swift established a working farm and orchard on his new property, he immediately dove into many other local activities. One of the first endeavors was his appointment as official census taker for the town of Cambria for the 1875 New York State Census. He was a member of the Democratic Party and attended many local, state, and national caucuses and conventions. Swift was one of the founding members of the Niagara County Pioneer Association in 1877, and until his death in 1903, was usually one of the featured speakers at the annual Pioneer Picnic held every August in the Pine Grove at Olcott. He also served as a juror on many cases in the county. Both Mr. and Mrs. Swift were prominent members of the Cambria Congregational Church, which is still in operation on Lower Mountain and Cambria roads. A setback for the Swifts occurred on October 9, 1881, when his home on Plank Road was destroyed in a fire. Swift had just left for the Democratic State Convention in Albany. His mother and two other relatives discovered the fire when they went to the house. Finding it locked, they entered the house through the outside cellar door and heard the crackling of flames in the kitchen. They began moving furniture from the front of the house outside. Neighbors began arriving to help. Not finding the hired man on the property, a search of the still burning house was made, and he was found sleeping in his second-floor bedroom. After his rescue, knowing the house could not be saved, efforts turned toward ensuring that the barn and outbuildings did not also catch fire. Mrs. Adeline Swift finally returned from visiting a neighbor, and Elisha Swift came home the next day. The house was considered a total loss. Swift's mother, Dorcas, died 2 days later, but none of the notices in the newspapers mentioned that her death was in any way connected to the fire. She was 87 years old and perhaps was unable to stand the shock of the event. A new house was built, which, looking at the illustration in the 1878 book, is almost identical to the original. The rebuilt house is still standing on Plank Road. Swift continued his interest in agriculture and assisted in the organization of the Niagara County Farmers Club in 1886. He was also a member of the Niagara County Agricultural Society, and in 1887 he proposed a resolution that no alcoholic beverages be sold on the fairgrounds property. The resolution was in response to a petition presented to the Society by the Women's Christian Temperance Union. The resolution passed. At one of the Farmers Club meetings, Swift made a rather unusual statement. A man could make a living on a 100-acre farm if he didn't ride a bicycle. He was also a judge at a Century Club debate in which the topic was resolved that man is women's superior. 3 men spoke in favor of the statement, while 3 women argued against it. Swift and 2 other judges, 1 man, 1 woman, voted in favor of the women. On October 17, 1890, Adeline Swift passed away of an undisclosed illness. She was 61 years, and they had been married for 40 years. The couple had no children. 2 years later, Swift, at age 69, married Ella Mae Travis, aged 23. The nearly 50-year age gap did create a mild scandal, but the Swifts rose above it, and he did not give up any involvement in the many organizations in which he was a member. 3 children were born to this second marriage: Elisha Barrow Jr., Milo Travis, and Ella Marie. Born in the 1890s, Elisha Jr. and Ella Marie both lived into the 1990s. Even in his 70s, Swift remained active with all of his agricultural, political, and civic interests. In 1902, a year before he passed away, in an editorial in the Lockport Journal, he encouraged farmers not to lose faith even when it appeared their fruit orchards weren't coming along as they had hoped. One of his last projects, and the one he was best remembered for later, was his authorship of the History of Cambria and other contributions in the 1902 Souvenir History of Niagara County, published by the Pioneer Association. Not long after this publications came out, Elisha Barlow Swift died of Bright's disease on March 24, 1903, at his home on Plank Road in Cambria at the age of 80. He left a 33-year-old widow and 3 children under the age of 10. He was buried in the family plot in Glenwood Cemetery with his first wife, and was later joined by his second wife, 2 of his children, several siblings, and many other relatives as well. The next article regarding genealogy, written by Carol DePiro Stipkovitz. Carol is a board chairman and vice president of Niagara County Genealogical Society. She is also a member of the Association of Professional Genealogists, National Genealogy Society, and New York Genealogical and Biological Society. If you have visited the Niagara County Genealogical Society Library, you know we have several family histories and photos that aren't found anywhere else. This is in part thanks to the many families with a local connection that have donated their own personal collections. We don't like to think about our mortality, but as genealogists, we need to consider what will happen to our research after we are gone. Donating your personal genealogy research to a local society ensures that years of careful research outlives any one individual and becomes part of the community's collective memory. Personal collections may include items such as family histories, letters, diaries, photographs, and other documents such as a will. Donations are evaluated based on condition, local connection, and research value. Why donate locally? Materials tied to a town, county, congregation, or regional industry are most valuable where they were created, as well as your local society gets the researchers who will use them the most, descendants. Before offering a collection to your local genealogical society, do a light weeding of the material. Provide a brief inventory, a 1 to 2 page overview listing families, places, dates, and formats, such as Smith Family Correspondence, 1908 to 1942, Newfane, New York Church Programs, 3 photo albums with IDs. Label photos with names, places, where known, and include a note, if appropriate, about what you created versus what you only copied. Some societies accept digital PDFs of compiled family histories only and will turn away any loose charts. Call first to ask about their policies. I recently received an email from a reader who shared her story showing the importance of these collections to a local organization. After my aunt passed, I inherited 6 banker's boxes, letters, funeral cards, photo albums with pencil notes, and a typed 220-page family history of our family lines. Keeping the original order, I made a simple inventory and created a PDF of the manuscript with a table of contents and index. I contacted my local genealogical society in our town. We met, reviewed the materials, and I agreed to donate the information. Within months, the society featured 3 of our label photographs in a Facebook post on the history of a local yearly festival. A year later, a high school student researching her family tree saw the photos, found our letters, cited them, and emailed to say our great-grandfather's descriptions of this event, mentioning her family, clarified a timeline missing from the research she could find. The collection left our attic and started doing real work for the genealogical community. This is a real-life example of how donating can and will help future researchers. Donating locally transforms private remembrance into public history, preserved and discoverable for generations to come. If you'd like to donate, reach out to your local genealogical society for more information. Unfortunately, most libraries don't have oodles of extra space. 2 file cabinets, 10 unmarked binders, and several stacks of paper is my genealogy research reality right now. So it must be organized. Planning now will keep your research out of the landfill later and just maybe help your great-grandchild further the family tree. And as a reminder, you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Gazette on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Time is now about 1:30. Now switching to Niagara Falls boys basketball. Working ahead, Niagara Falls getting kicks out on the floor at 2026 Team Camp by Max O'Neill. After coming off a disappointing campaign last year, Niagara Falls is back in the gym and back to work. The team knows it can do better, and it is putting in the work to get better. The players are working hard individually and as a team, and one of the first opportunities to show that off came at the Niagara Falls Team Camp Friday at Niagara Falls High School. We just want the kids to compete today, Niagara Falls head coach Carlos Bradbury said. We haven't worked on much of anything offensively. We're just trying to really work on getting our press down and just focusing on our kids playing hard. So that's really the goal of today. Everybody just come out and compete and play hard. Last year, Niagara Falls went 8-12 overall and lost to Jamestown 61-54 in the Section 6 Class AAA semifinals. The loss meant that for the first time since 2020, Niagara Falls failed to make it to the sectional title game. The team also became the first Wolverines squad to finish below 500 since the 2013-14 season. Heading into next season, Bradbury does not feel pressure to turn it around. He is hoping his team finds success. This year's team will have to replace 4 players from last year's team, including the team's leading scorer, Trey Gale, who averaged 11.9 points per game. In total, the team is losing 288 of the team's 1,102 points. One of the biggest differences between this year's team and last year's squad is the fact that this year's team will have a lot of experience, with 6 seniors including DeQuarius Seabury. One of the players who will be tasked with replacing that production is Seabury, who averaged 6.6 points, 2.5 assists, 2.2 rebounds, and 1.5 steals per game. Probably my shooting skills and ball handling and being a leader, talking, being vocal, Seabury said about what he has been working on so far this summer. The coaching staff of this year's team will look different with the addition of Wayne Olison. Through his role with 716 United, Olison and the Wolverines players have already been working out together this summer trying to improve. During the team camp, the Falls hosted 7 other teams in a bracket format with a winner's bracket and a consolation bracket after the first round. In the Wolverines' first round game, they beat Williamsville South 70-17. During much of the win over Williamsville South, Niagara Falls was putting on a full court press, something that Bradbury knows will be a calling card for his team when the season officially kicks off in November. In order to get in the kind of shape that will allow them to play the full court defense for an entire game, the Wolverines need to get in better cardio shape. During the first game of the camp, Seabury learned that the team's full court press is the team's recipe for victory. That's what we're working on, Bradbury said. We're planning on hopefully getting in enough shape that we'll be able to do that all season in every game. So that's the goal, to get us in enough shape that will be our sort of our new MO, is guarding for 32 minutes, full court, pressing and trapping. We just got to get in a lot better shape to do it. The camp can allow Bradbury and his staff to experiment with different lineup combinations and strategies during games that do not count. They get to see who plays well together and who does not, and what roles to put players in. It also gives players who are on the line between playing on the junior varsity team or making it on the varsity team the opportunity to prove themselves. I'm looking at the kids that compete hard and taking a look at some of your younger kids who we may give a chance to be on varsity this year, who are sort of on the fringe of being a JV or varsity guy, Bradbury said. So it gives those guys a chance to come out and compete against older guys and gives us a chance to evaluate them a little bit. While the fall schedule for this upcoming season has not yet been released, the team will be starting practice during the first week of November. Now here's a story about Bob Lowry, a tennis player who was remembered with a new sign at the Hyde Park tennis courts during a recent dedication called A Legacy in Play by Robert Creenan. Hyde Park's tennis courts were a place of refuge for Robert J. Lowry during his fight with cancer, something that has stuck with those who knew him for the past 35 years. Those courts on Robbins Drive were dedicated to Lowry's memory on Monday. He died on January 26, 1991, at the age of 56. A new sign has been installed in place so dear to a man well known throughout the area for his dedication to local sports. He was totally immersed in the community, totally immersed in the city, and a believer in the city, said Mark Lowry, Robert's son and former Niagara Falls school superintendent. In his 32 years in education, the elder Lowry was the curriculum coordinator for Niagara Falls schools, coached basketball, and was the voice for Niagara University basketball on WJJL. He was also involved with Our Lady of Mount Carmel, the Police Athletic League, and was a part-time sports writer for the Niagara Gazette. At the age of 46, Lowry was diagnosed with lymphoma, with his doctor telling him to get fit and active. For the next 10 years, except during the winter, he could be found at the Hyde Park tennis courts every day, usually walking there from his nearby home. Mark said his father chose that sport despite never playing it growing up because golf didn't provide as much body movement as his doctors had directed. Since it is also a social game, he was also able to play with his friends. Growing up, we always knew where my father was, said Mark's brother, Tom. If we had any questions or help with our homework, we always knew to come here to the tennis courts. Now, 3 decades later, I still get to come to the tennis courts, and I know my father's presence is still here. With Mark going into education and Tom running Firth Jewelers on Military Road, his older brother Jeffrey was a professional tennis player in Long Island, New Jersey, and Florida before becoming a tennis coach in California. The tennis courts were originally dedicated to Lowry on May 27, 1991, 4 months after his death, by then-Mayor Michael O'Loughlin with a sign near its parking lot. With city parks receiving millions of dollars in various park improvements this year, Lowry's widow, Dolores, wanted to make sure he was not forgotten. She and Niagara Falls Mayor Robert Restano go to the same church, and one day she went up to him to make this request, noting the current sign there was looking tired. E-Man Inc. on Porter Road provided the graphics and details of the new sign. We want to bring people back into the park, Restano said. I think it would be something that Mr. Lowry would appreciate because he was all about outdoor activity and healthfulness. Next, attorney. Reparations warranted for toxic woes. Grassroots group holds public meeting attended by state and federal officials by Mark Shearer. Much has been made in recent weeks about elevated levels of radiation found on private properties and inside homes of residents living in one neighborhood in the town of Niagara. During a meeting organized by a grassroots group of those town homeowners on Monday, local attorney and author Kristen Civiletto described how deeply concerning it has been for residents on Chester and Fox Avenues to have to leave their homes amid concerns about their health. She also said it's hardly the only environmental issue involving threats to public health facing the Niagara Falls area these days. The author of the book, Thundering Waters, The Toxic Legacy of Niagara, told dozens of residents who gathered for the meeting at the Wyndham Garden Hotel in downtown Niagara Falls that there are multiple areas of environmental concern currently percolating in the area today. Her short list including testing tied to substances found at the Griffin Park boat ramp, a state review of contaminants found in the western end of Cayuga Island, and steps taken to reduce pollutants linked to bladder cancer from being released at the Goodyear plant off 56th Street. Without going into detail, she also referenced what she described as a relatively new concern that she said involves homeowners living in a neighborhood near the Love Canal landfill in LaSalle. Add it all up, and Civiletto said she believes Falls area residents and homeowners impacted by the community's high levels of toxicity may be entitled to reparations, a term used to cover official actions such as public apologies and financial compensation, given by governments or groups as a way to address past wrongdoings or systemic harms. We have multi-billion-dollar companies who have earned their millions on the backs of the people of Niagara Falls, Civiletto said. They left town, most of them, but they left their mess behind. Monday's meeting, organized by the group Save Our Backyards Niagara, offered residents from the town and the falls the opportunity to express their concerns and offer ideas for follow-up actions. It followed a much more contentious meeting organized last week by representatives from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the two agencies leading an ongoing investigation into radioactive hotspots in both Niagara and Erie counties. In addition to Civiletto, the meeting featured Diane Dorigo, a representative from the national nonprofit organization Nuclear Information and Resource Service, and the four Town of Niagara homeowners, Lexi Hawk, Carolyn Johnson, Jackie Linkowski, and Kelly Mitoika, who were relocated last month amid high levels of radiation being detected on their properties and in their homes. The homeowners group is strongly encouraging state officials, including Governor Kathy Hochul, to declare their neighborhood in the town of Niagara a state Superfund site, which they say will help accelerate the relocation and cleanup process for residents. Speakers also stressed the need for those in attendance to work together to continue pushing environmental regulators and public officials for full transparency where testing and test results are concerned. They want to reduce panic, but you as a homeowner deserve the truth, Linkowski said, referring to the representatives from the DEC and the EPA. Town of Lewiston resident Anita Muzi called on residents in the audience to do what she's been doing in recent days, calling each of her elected local, state, and federal officials and asking them to get involved and start taking real action on behalf of their constituents. She said she found some of her conversations with aides to her representatives sickening. She described the lack of response from her elected officials themselves as deafening. I told every one of them, look up the name John LaFalce. That's what you should be doing right now, Muzi said, referring to the former congressman who was known for his work fighting for residents during the Love Canal era. Several representatives from the two lead environmental agencies attended Monday's session. Following the meeting, Stephen McBay, a public information officer for the EPA from New York City, said he appreciated the opportunity to attend the meeting and listen to the homeowners' concerns. It was useful, very helpful, he said. As to Civiletto's reference to potential reparations for aggrieved area residents and homeowners, McBay said he didn't know anything about it, adding that agency officials were there, specifically in a listening capacity. I think that was the benefit of us being here in the first place, was to be able to hear comments like that so we could take them back to people in the rooms and let them know what the expectations are and what people are talking about. That was the whole purpose, McBay said. Monday's meeting followed the issuance of another round of property access forms delivered by the DEC and EPA to local homeowners, this time dozens living in a neighborhood off Hyde Park Boulevard near Hyde Park and the city golf course. As they did in the town of Niagara previously, the agencies are now looking to gain access to private properties on Gerald Avenue, 32nd and 35th Streets, and other areas of the Hyde Park neighborhood to perform additional on-site radiological testing. McBay said the latest round of letters is all part of the ongoing radiological assessment process. This is what we've been doing, sending out these access agreements and wanting to cast a wide net so we can start getting into these initial screenings, he said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Gazette on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The time is now about 45 minutes past the hour. And now here's an article by Mary Hunt called The Everyday Cheapskate. 7 Habits of the Rich. A habit is defined as a behavior repeated so often it becomes almost automatic. I am in awe of the power of a habit. It's a force to change your life, and it is available to anyone, no matter their situation or circumstances. For 5 years, author Tom Corley observed the daily habits of the rich and the poor and documented his findings in his book, Rich Habits, The Daily Success Habits of Wealthy Individuals. Corley defines the rich as those earning at least $160,000 per year, with a minimum $3.2 million in assets. Individuals with an annual income of less than $30,000 and fewer than $5,000 in assets are defined as poor. Remarkably, Corley discovered that rich folks have a lot more in common than just income. They share the same habits and daily behaviors, which, for the most part, he did not find among the poor. Corley presents a compelling argument. Becoming rich is not about how lucky you are. It may have more to do with how you spend your day, beginning with the hour you wake up. In his years of observation, Corley learned that it's not so much the economy or outside influences, but your daily habits that set you up for either wealth or poverty. Because we know that we have control over our thoughts and actions, and that we can develop habits simply by choosing to repeat the same behavior over and over again until it becomes almost automatic. What if were we to copy the daily behaviors of authentically wealthy people? Could you become more financially fit if you were to give up your bad money habits and replace them with habits that are proven to help you become more financially fit? You be the judge, but I'm putting my money on yes. Here are the habits that Corley found to be common among the hundreds of wealthy people he followed for 5 years. Habit: early to rise. Corley found that rich folks rise early to take advantage of the wee morning hours. 44% of Corley's research subjects wake up at least 3 hours before they need to be at their job. They use these hours to focus on personal improvement, like reading educational books, blogs, and trade journals. And they squeeze in some type of physical fitness too. Habit: lunch? Yes. Break? No. 55% did not take long lunches or any lunch break at all. Sure, these folks eat, but they wheel and deal in between. They eat at their desks while they work. A long leisurely lunch is not a wealthy habit. Habit: no slacking. Corley didn't find the rich hanging around the water cooler. They are not ones to watch the clock or continually calculate how much longer they must work before they can leave for the day. On the contrary, the rich don't waste time. The minute they reach their office or place of work, they're planning their day. Most of the wealthy maintain a daily to-do list and check off 70% of their tasks every day. They also set long-term goals. Habit: being calorie conscious. Rich folks are big calorie counters. Corley found most wealthy people limit alcohol consumption and hardly ever consume junk food. They keep snacks to just 300 calories per day because they are health conscious. To wealthy people, being healthy is a means to making more money. Corley discovered they believe that if they're healthy, they'll have fewer sick days. If they're exercising, they'll have more energy. The rich maintain health as a way of life so they can work longer careers. Habit. No gossiping. Got a juicy tidbit to pass along to a coworker, friend, or relative? Before you do that, consider this. 79% of low-income people say they gossip, compared with just 6% of wealthy individuals. Enough said. Habit. Limited internet. The poor are twice as likely to go on Facebook after work, and they spend an hour or longer surfing the internet. The rich spend their after-work hours volunteering, networking, and socializing in ways that do not involve smartphones or cyberspace. They engage in personal relationships, preferring to see the internet as a business tool, not a source of recreation or social interaction. Habit. Earn more, spend less. The rich live below their means. They spend less than they earn. They believe that if they're wealthy enough, they can afford to live below their means. Next, jetting off for a summer vacation, how to eat and drink to minimize jet lag. Jet lag threatens to turn even a dream vacation into a slog. And with peak travel season underway, millions of people may have to contend with this disorienting condition, which can cause sleep disturbances, daytime tiredness, headaches, and nasty gastrointestinal symptoms. But you can minimize the effects of jet lag, and not just by adjusting your sleep-wake schedule. What and how you eat and drink can make a difference too. Jet lag occurs when your body's biological clock is out of sync with the time zone you find yourself in. Usually, environmental cues such as sunrises and sunsets help set your internal clock. But when you cross time zones, it may take a few days for your body to adjust. I've personally experienced pretty severe jet lag before during 2 European trips, said Tara Schmidt, a registered dietitian at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. It really kind of ruined the first few days of my vacation. While symptoms of jet lag vary, digestive problems such as bloating, constipation, or diarrhea are not uncommon, said Joanne Slavin, a nutrition expert at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. One way to minimize jet lag is to begin gradually shifting the timing of your meals as you get ready for travel. Schmidt suggested first moving them by 15 minutes, then a half hour, then an hour closer to the destination time zone. Then after you get where you're going, eat when the locals eat. If it's morning, have breakfast. A hearty one aligned with your new time zone can help you recover from jet lag. A 2023 study co-authored by Northwestern University researchers suggests, as the day goes on, keep to the same schedule, having lunch and dinner at times appropriate for the location. To avoid stomach aches, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention advises keeping meals smaller just before and during travel. Schmidt said this is particularly important in the early days of a trip. Smaller meals tend to be more easily tolerated for people, especially if you have a sensitive stomach or maybe are dealing with some of those GI discomforts, Schmidt said. Later in the trip, she said, you may be able to ease into eating more at one sitting. Just be mindful about foods that you might not be used to, especially greasy or high-fat items. Enjoying a meal abroad is so fun, especially when you're experiencing a new culture, a new food, she said. It's also best to skip that glass of wine or pint of beer. As fun as it is sometimes when we travel, we really do endorse avoiding alcohol because alcohol is such a huge sleep disruptor, Schmidt said. Another pro tip, use caffeine strategically. If you normally have a cup of coffee or tea in the morning, it's fine to do that while traveling, but don't have caffeine so late in the day that it will keep you up. And be aware that both caffeine and alcohol can make you more dehydrated. And some letters from Dear Annie. Dear Annie, most often a cheating husband or wife causes the divorce. Most would want to end their marriage after finding their partner cheated, and most people would advise the offended partner to leave. This is most of what I read in people's letters and people's responses to you. But it doesn't have to be like that. Actually, it can be one of the most beautiful things in the world. Love and forgiveness and thankfulness. I remember a serious girlfriend telling me once she would divorce me immediately if she found I cheated. No questions asked. And I would have expected myself to understand that clearly and feel reciprocally, but I didn't. I was offended that she felt that. I saw my feelings toward her were so deep that if the opposite happened and she cheated, I would want to forgive her rather than lose her. I knew my feelings would be crushed. Trust would be broken and a long road lay ahead. I knew a cheater would need to be truly seeking to reconcile, but I would want that to be true for us over the other outcome, divorce. A year or two later, our relationship ended for other reasons, but I'll always remember those strong, pure feelings of till death do us part, and for better or worse. I know it would take a person who was truly sorry, and I know the adage, once a cheater, always a cheater, is probably more often the truth. But imagine 60 years later, an old man waking up and seeing his old wife next to him in bed every morning and thinking, here is the woman who loved me, enough to forgive me, even though I never deserved it. Signed, Things Can End Good. Dear Things Can End Good, thank you for your unusual and interesting perspective. Yes, things can end good with love and forgiveness, but cheating in a marriage creates hurt feelings. Always. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from current issues of the Niagara Gazette. We read from the Niagara Gazette every Saturday at 11 a.m. Your reader has been Ken Kuminski. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the Dunkirk Observer. Following that at 1 o'clock, we have a reading of some of our Northtown Bee papers, including Amherst, Clarence, Cheektowaga, Lancaster, and Depew. And then at 2 o'clock, we have the Southtown Bees, which includes Orchard Park, the Hamburg Sun, the East Aurora, and West Seneca papers. Stay with us for these readings and more. You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Radio Reading broadcasts daily readings 24 hours a day of newspapers, magazines, and books to people who are blind or have a print disability and are provided reading radios. Radio Reading's broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. From broadcast studios at 1199 Harlem Road, Radio Reading continues our almost 40-year tradition of award-winning service. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555. program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability,